For years, Europe's economy was celebrated for its stability, high living standards, and strong social safety nets. Many nations within the continent enjoyed robust manufacturing, thriving tourism, and a reputation for quality goods. Yet behind this image of prosperity, cracks were forming. Today, Europe finds itself in a state of economic turmoil, facing debt crises, rising unemployment, and political unrest that threaten to unravel decades of progress. This is the dark side of Europe's economic collapse, a story of policy missteps, social strain, and shifting global dynamics that have left millions questioning the future of the continent. The roots of Europe's current crisis stretch back to a time when the continent seemed unstoppable. After World War II, European nations came together to rebuild from the ruins, laying the foundation for what would become the European Union. The creation of a single market and the introduction of the euro were hailed as milestones of unity, designed to strengthen economic ties and ensure peace. For a while, these measures worked. Trade flourished, living standards improved, and Europe seemed on track to become a major economic superpower. But beneath the surface, deep imbalances were taking shape. One of the earliest warning signs emerged with the introduction of the euro in 1999. Countries with vastly different economic structures and fiscal policies were suddenly tied to a single currency, managed by the European Central Bank. While this system reduced transaction costs and facilitated trade, it also removed a key tool for individual nations to respond to economic shocks: currency devaluation. When a country experienced economic trouble in the past, it could devalue its currency to make exports cheaper and regain competitiveness. Under the euro, that option vanished, forcing nations to confront their problems without this traditional lifeline. The global financial crisis of 2008 exposed the weaknesses of Europe's monetary union. Nations like Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal had accumulated massive debts, relying on cheap credit that flowed freely during the boom years. When the crisis hit, investors panicked and borrowing costs soared for these heavily indebted nations. A series of bailout packages and austerity measures followed, imposing deep cuts on social services and public spending. While these measures were intended to stabilize economies, they often led to recession, unemployment, and social unrest. The stark reality was that many European countries were stuck in a cycle of debt, with little room to invest in future growth. Unemployment became a major crisis, particularly among young people. In countries like Greece and Spain, youth unemployment rates soared above 40%. An entire generation found itself locked out of the job market, forced to delay adulthood and rely on family support. This wave of frustration fueled political discontent, giving rise to new movements and parties that challenged the status quo. For many, the European dream of prosperity and opportunity felt like a broken promise. The refugee crisis of 2015 added another layer of strain to Europe's economic and political landscape. Millions of people fleeing conflict and hardship in the Middle East and Africa arrived at Europe's borders, seeking asylum. While some nations embraced the newcomers, others balked at the prospect of integrating large numbers of migrants into societies already under economic stress. This debate over immigration exposed fault lines in the EU's solidarity, undermining the unity that the euro was supposed to foster. The resulting tensions contributed to a sense of fragmentation, as countries clashed over how to manage external pressures while still grappling with internal economic problems. Brexit in 2016 dealt another blow to Europe's image of stability. The United Kingdom's decision to leave the EU sent shockwaves through global markets and shook the continent's political foundations. For decades, London had served as one of the world's leading financial centers, facilitating investment and trade throughout Europe. With Brexit, that dynamic changed. Banks and multinational corporations began relocating parts of their operations to other European cities, reducing London's role as the continent's financial hub. The ongoing negotiations and uncertainty around Brexit further complicated economic planning for businesses and governments alike, adding yet another layer of instability to Europe's economic landscape. Energy dependence also emerged as a critical vulnerability. Many European nations rely on imported oil and gas, particularly from Russia. Political tensions and conflicts can lead to sudden spikes in energy prices or supply disruptions, placing heavy burdens on both consumers and businesses. Efforts to transition to renewable energy have been hampered by fragmented policies, inadequate investment, and disagreements over how quickly to phase out fossil fuels. Meanwhile, energy-intensive industries such as steel and chemicals face higher costs and fierce global competition. This reliance on external energy sources leaves Europe's economy exposed to geopolitical risks beyond its control. Another dimension of Europe's economic collapse is the aging population and declining birth rates. Many European countries now face the challenge of supporting a growing number of retirees with a shrinking workforce. Pensions and healthcare systems are under immense pressure, as fewer workers contribute taxes to fund social programs. Younger generations, already dealing with high housing costs and limited job opportunities, are asked to shoulder the burden of supporting older populations. This demographic shift strains government budgets and stifles economic dynamism, as consumer spending and innovation can wane in societies where a large segment of the population is no longer in the workforce. Income inequality and wealth disparities within Europe have also become more pronounced. In major cities like Paris, London, and Berlin, housing prices have soared, making it nearly impossible for lower-income families to live in urban centers. Gentrification has pushed long-time residents to the outskirts, while wealthy investors snap up properties for speculative gains. Rural regions, meanwhile, are often left behind, with limited access to public services and dwindling job prospects. This urban-rural divide fuels social tensions and political polarization, further weakening the continent's sense of cohesion. The rise of populist movements across Europe is both a symptom and a cause of this economic malaise. As voters grow frustrated with traditional parties and the EU establishment, they turn to leaders who promise radical change or a return to national sovereignty. These populist politicians often blame external forces, immigration, globalization, or bureaucratic elites, for the economic hardships people face. While such rhetoric can win votes, it rarely addresses the underlying structural problems. Instead, populist policies sometimes lead to trade barriers, tighter immigration controls, and conflicts with neighboring countries, undermining the cooperation needed to solve transnational economic challenges. Technological change has added yet another layer of complexity. Automation, artificial intelligence, and the shift toward digital economies have created new opportunities, but also new risks. Traditional industries face disruption, and workers in manufacturing or routine service jobs may find themselves displaced by robots or software. While some European nations have invested heavily in education and job retraining, others have lagged behind. The result is a patchwork of success stories and failures, with some regions thriving in the new digital age, while others slip deeper into economic decline. As Europe's economy stumbles, the social costs become increasingly apparent. High unemployment, especially among young people, leads to lost potential and rising mental health issues. Austerity measures meant to stabilize budgets often result in cuts to healthcare, education, and social welfare, fueling public anger. The fabric of communities frays as families struggle to cope with reduced incomes and limited prospects. Political polarization intensifies, and the debate over whether to prioritize fiscal discipline or social investment becomes ever more heated. The dark side of Europe's economic collapse extends beyond mere statistics. It's visible in the frustration of jobless youth, the shuttered storefronts in once thriving towns, and the anxieties of retirees worried about their pensions. It's seen in the rise of political movements that challenge the very idea of a united Europe. The disintegration of the middle class and the erosion of social mobility contribute to a sense of hopelessness, as people question whether the European dream, a counterpart to America's vision of opportunity, has slipped beyond their grasp. Amid these challenges, there are calls for reform. Some economists advocate for increased public investment in infrastructure, green energy, and research to spur innovation and create new jobs. Others suggest revising EU fiscal rules to allow struggling nations more flexibility in stimulating their economies. Proponents of deeper European integration argue that only a truly unified approach to taxation, defense, and social policy can address the root causes of the crisis. Critics, however, worry that further centralization could undermine national sovereignty and alienate citizens who already feel disconnected from Brussels. The future of Europe's economy remains uncertain. While some nations have weathered the storm better than others, the continent as a whole faces a daunting set of obstacles. Demographic shifts, global competition, energy dependence, and the lingering effects of past crises all weigh heavily on Europe's prospects. Political infighting and a lack of consensus often stall the bold action that might reverse the decline. Without significant structural reforms, the dark side of Europe's economic collapse may deepen, with social unrest, regional disparities, and political fragmentation becoming the norm. Yet, even in this climate of uncertainty, Europe still has strengths that could pave the way for a turnaround. The continent's rich history of innovation, cultural diversity, and high levels of education are assets that can be harnessed for renewal. If governments and institutions can find the political will to enact forward-looking policies, investing in green technologies, supporting small businesses, and promoting fair labor practices, there is a chance to rebuild a more resilient and equitable economic system. The question is whether Europe's leaders can muster the unity and resolve to pursue these goals, or if the continent will remain mired in a cycle of crisis and stagnation. For now, the dark side of Europe's economic collapse serves as a warning to the rest of the world. Even regions with advanced infrastructure, strong social programs, and a history of cooperation are not immune to the forces of globalization, demographic change, and political upheaval. If Europe fails to address its internal divisions and revitalize its economies, the consequences will be felt far beyond its borders. The global economy is interconnected, and a weakened Europe means reduced demand for exports, decreased investment flows, and a potential shift in geopolitical power. Ultimately, the fate of Europe's economy lies in the hands of its citizens, policymakers, and business leaders. Whether they choose to confront the structural problems head-on or cling to short-term fixes will determine whether the continent can regain its footing. The stakes are high, not only for Europe's 447 million inhabitants, but also for a world that has long looked to Europe as a beacon of cultural richness, social progress, and economic stability. In this moment of reckoning, the continent must decide whether to adapt and evolve, or sink deeper into the shadows of its economic collapse. Thank you for joining this exploration of the dark side of Europe's economic collapse. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We invite you to join the conversation. What do you believe are the key steps needed to revitalize Europe's economy and restore stability to the continent? Stay tuned for more in-depth discussions on global economic trends and the forces shaping our world.